All right, my friends, hello and welcome to Fantasy as Social Commentary. My name is Joshua Lee Ronan. I'm the founder and executive coordinator for WriteHive. I'm here today with our dear and wonderful friend, and I don't want to mispronounce your name, Andy Peloquin. Did I get that right?
Well, so technically it's Peloquin,
Ooh.
French Canadian name, but I don't want to sound like a douchebag, so I always just say Peloquin. It's easier.
Okay, fair enough. Andy, did you want to talk a little bit about your writing and what you've been up to lately?
Yeah, for sure. So I am a fantasy writer, epic dark fantasy writer that I just recently, as of actually this week, April 14th, branched out into sci-fi. Basically, I write super action-packed kick-ass stories, but then I kind of try to make not as much a social commentary, but a human commentary in every single story. Every one of my characters has these complex human flaws that I, as a reader and as a writer, love diving into in a way that I don't often find in other fiction. So for me, that is really what makes the story writing process so interesting, is exploring these things.
I dig it. So let's start broad and then we'll work narrow. The broad question is, should art contain some kind of message like that? Is there a necessity for art to contain some social commentary?
Well, saying that art should anything is in itself putting constraints on something and entirely unconstrainable. Art is everything. Art explores every single facet of human life. So whether it's a piece of art that just brings joy and brings a smile to your face, or it's something that dives into the deeper things, art is valid in all its forms. So as an author, I don't know if it's necessary to say, yes, we as writers, I'm going to play on it as right, because I can't draw to save my life. So
Neither can I. It's all
writing,
right.
that's as far as my art form goes. But now, if I was to say I have to explore a deep societal or psychological or human issue in every single story, it would be sort of putting myself in this box that wouldn't leave room for the creative.
Mm.
Whereas I would say that art is a platform that allows it, and if you feel it's necessary as an artist to explore that, do it in whatever capacity you feel is right. Do it, because the truth is that I don't have a whole lot of experience in any of these things. I'm not a political science major. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not, I'm nobody to comment on these deep political issues. But if I feel that there's something that I have to say on the subject that could provide value to my readers, to maybe give them a new perspective that they hadn't seen before, then if I want to do it, then yes, absolutely. But it's not like I have to do it.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important distinction that you made there. That I think the key ingredient is what you have to say about it, what you specifically have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the story I'm writing now is military, right? The guy is a former special ops sniper turned government assassin, right?
Badass.
So there are so many different ways that I could play with it. That I could dive into all of the many complex psychological and societal things that could stem from that. He's special ops, and not the kind of special ops like the Marine, more like the kind of who goes in there, destabilizes an established regime, or like the black bag shit. And so that comes with all kinds of moral quandaries that the character would have to ask himself, or that they would be faced with. But that's not the story that I'm trying to tell. So not getting into that, it's not a bad thing. Or the character's got an AI in his brain that allows him to walk after an accident shattered his spine and left him paraplegic. So, the whole AI, sentience, programming, all of that, that's another thing that I could get into, a real Asimov direction. But that's not the story that I'm trying to tell. So there's so many different facets to every single one of these things that exploring them all is so exciting. And you don't have to explore them all in the same story. You can explore specific angles. Like mine right now is sort of the drug addiction. He's a recovering drug addict, and so playing with the way that affects his life, both past and future, and the people he interacts with, and all of that. It's the angle that I wanted to focus on, as opposed to other bigger picture things.
I like it. How do you choose what angle to focus on? Does that come before you start writing or as you're writing?
It's kind of a mix of both. So I always start with a character that's interesting. I'll tell you, I'll sort of walk you through my process with this one. I knew I wanted to write an assassin, right? Because I love assassins. My first series was assassins. My second series had a whole house of criminals dedicated to assassins. They're fun, right? They have all the fun. But I knew that because I already had so many assassins in my fantasy, I'd have to do something else, and sci-fi just kind of seemed more fun. And doing research for the military fantasy series that I was writing, I had been talking to a sniper and got a ton of information specifically related to that. And so I was like, okay, let's play with sniper. But instead of going with a SWAT sniper or just your regular generic like a marine sniper or a force recon or anything like that, let's go with something a bit darker because I end up gravitating towards the darker stuff. It's just more fun. So that sort of black ops special forces team sniper. But then, okay, why isn't he in the military anymore? Why is he no longer there? Well, he got meted out because of this injury. And then when he's injured, he loses his connection to everything that he knew, his family, his team, his career, his purpose. So where could he go? He's probably going to go to a dark place. Well, let's go really dark. Let's go drugs. And it's just sort of building out as it goes. And so I didn't set out to write this story, but as I started to think about the character and flesh out the idea and the world in which he lives and the challenges, it just came about in this way.
Neat. Have you ever written a story with the message in mind first?
I haven't.
Okay.
Or not that I can think of offhand. I do have sort of an idea of what I'm going to be exploring before I sit down to write any story, but things always come up in really interesting ways. That there's just this one sentence that pops into your head when you're in the middle of the writing flow, and you drop something in there that you're not expecting, and all of a sudden the focus of the story totally shifts in a way that you hadn't expected. And so you play into that, you lean into that, and then the story kind of evolves on its own. And that's how I find that I have ended up writing in a lot of these sort of deeper themes, because it's what I'm always thinking about. I'm always thinking about the why of the characters. And as I'm going through that, as I'm sort of pushing deeper, these things pop up. And that's when I can really sort of lean into it and explore it through the course of the story, because I'm sort of coming face to face with these concepts for the first time. And so walking my character through the journey helps me to explore them too. And of course, it helps the reader to explore them.
Yeah. Do you think that it probably serves the story to come at him organically like that, as opposed to planting them ahead of time?
Well, yes and no. I've done some things where I planted it ahead of time and it worked out well, and sometimes it just pops up organically, and it usually works out well with with a little bit more tweaking. But going into it with sort of this open mind, blank slate, creative mindset helps me to be sort of in the right state of mind for these things to come up, and for me to recognize the opportunities that they present, and then to craft them and lean into them more. And of course, not from my own, oh yeah, I know this automatically. It takes a lot of research to get it right.
No doubt. So there is, as I'm sure you're aware, kind of a binary in the writing community between those who write genre fiction and those who write literary fiction.
Yeah.
And there's the age-old kind of argument from those who write literary that genre fiction should stay in its lane, basically, that it should just focus on, characters fighting dragons and that they should just do that. But obviously, writing that, we know that that those people are human, right? That they're struggling with things. It might be some crazy far-flung future, but hey, there are drug addictions in crazy far-flung futures.
Absolutely.
There are post-traumatic stress disorders associated with fighting dragons. So I guess what I'm getting at is, what would you say to someone who writes literary or reads literary and says that genre fiction can't attack social issues the way that literary fiction can?
I will agree with it, because it's not designed to.
Interesting.
Literary fiction, the whole purpose of literary fiction is to do that.
Yeah.
It's to examine these deep societal issues. Like take probably one of the most classic examples of literary genre fiction, and that I would say Asimov. Asimov, his works are huge in terms of scope, in terms of thought. Like the things that he explores through his stories are just like, they're beyond me as a writer. They're a little bit even beyond me as a reader sometimes. So being able to do that through literary fiction is amazing, but it's not the only type of fiction, just like mystery is not the only type of fiction, or romance isn't the only type of fiction. There are other ways to, there's many ways to skin a cat. So let's say I'm writing genre fiction. You could probably call my stuff pretty commercial fiction, because I'm not writing these deep issues. I'm not diving into things, like, the truth is that I write stories to entertain. But then when you get into it, when you sort of sink your teeth into the characters, when you're engaged and entertained, then when these issues come up, you're allowed to, you're given this dissociation that makes it easier to examine these deeper concepts without feeling like you're being lectured. Like, one complaint a lot of people have about genre literary fiction is that it's kind of dry. You don't really get a lot of story, a lot of action. You get a lot of these deep insights, which for people who like that is amazing. For people, I'm going to put myself into the category of people who need something to sink their teeth into, some kick-ass, some fun, something to really keep me hooked. So that kind of thing, it doesn't appeal to me. But neither is better than the other. I would say that any literary fiction author who sort of denigrates genre fiction, they're missing the beauty of what genre fiction has to offer. And the same thing for genre authors who say, literary fiction is too boring. It's got some really amazing potential. It's just a totally different way of approaching the same thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that if you're out there writing genre fiction right now and you haven't picked up something like Murakami book, you absolutely should, just to see what literary fiction is getting into, and try to apply it to your own work.
Absolutely, and some of my favorite genre fiction has some elements of literary fiction. I was listening to the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. I binge listened to that series because it's so good.
It's so hard not to.
There's so much fun, but then you get these moments in there that are just pure literary fiction, where he's just sort of uncorking this fine wine of truth, and it's wrapped inside this action-packed, character-driven story. But there's still those nuggets, and they come up a lot more often than I would say even in my own stuff. His stuff it drops some pretty big truth bombs. I kind of keep mine much more narrowly focused, but that doesn't mean that the stories are any less real or any less genuine or have anything less to offer in terms of, enrichment to someone who wants to understand more about human nature or humanity in general.
Yeah. Do you think that there is maybe an advantage to writing about social issues with the lens of fiction? For example, it might be really hard to talk about PTSD in a sort of naked way, in a literary fiction way, or maybe even through a war fiction movie. But maybe you can address the problem a little bit easier if it's Tony Stark, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So what I love to say is that fantasy and science fiction, it gives sort of this lens that dissociates the reader from the material they're reading without making it any less real. So like, let's say if I decided that I had a problem with Catholicism and I wrote this scathing piece of, an essay bashing Catholicism, I would immediately alienate a massive population of the world. Now, I'm going to make up the name of this religion, Canker. And now I decided that I'm going to bash this religion. Well, no one's going to get mad because it's not their religion. It's not a personal attack against them. But when they see the sort of similarities between cankerism and Catholicism, and I'm drawing these conclusions and I'm sort of highlighting things, they can't really help but think about it. And so it sort of stops it from feeling like a personal attack without diminishing the point of what you're trying to write.
Yeah, I totally hope that cankerism comes up in your next book, by the way.
Now I kind of have to.
Let's go with you personally first, and then we'll broaden it out a bit. For you personally, are there any issues that you just don't touch?
Honestly, no. Anything that's organic to the story, anything that's real, I'll play with it because it is something that comes up in human life. At the same time, if it's not the story I'm trying to tell, or if it's not something that is relevant to the specific aspects of the story, then I won't deal with it. As an example, in the second book of my Cerberus series, the character, he flies back to his home world, finds out that his first love's younger sister has transitioned to a younger brother. It's not my place, or it's not the character's story to tell that transition story, the things that the now young man has gone through and all of that. But it's in there. It's in there. And so had the focus been on this younger character as opposed to the relationship between the guy and his love, the older sister, then it would have been a story that I focused on. But it's not the one that I was trying to deal with. Whereas in another story, the character is dealing with a character who's pansexual. And there was a little moment in there where dealing with or explaining pansexuality felt like the right choice for the character, something that they would actually say, something they would share, a part of themselves. And so again, it's not something that I explored on this deep level, but being able to just bring it up and delving it into a little bit was more important, or was important enough to develop this character, compared to, say, drug addiction, which I also know nothing about, but it's sort of a central focus of the story, so I have to bring it up, and it's a recurring theme.
Yeah. I know this is a little prickly, so we can tiptoe if we need to. When talking about bringing in LGBTQ characters or characters of different races or different faith bases, when you don't share those experiences, what do you do if indeed you want to bring those into the story?
I just talk to people who are these things. So, for example, with this pansexual character that I wrote, I reached out to an author who openly identifies as pansexual and said, "Hey, look, I'm trying to write this character. I want to make sure that I'm approaching it respectfully and that I portray them accurately. So now, explain to me who you are. Don't tell me how to write this character. Tell me who you are and how you feel and how you respond to things, or in this case, pansexuality. What is it about a specific male, female, or non-binary that attracts you?" And so getting them to talk about them as opposed to, well, all of anything is like this. If I get to understand who they are, then it's easier for me to accurately portray sort of a version of them through the story. And then I asked this person straight out, what would you want to see in a story that features a character like this? Like, if you were being represented on a page, what would you want to see? And so they said, "Oh, I'd like to see how a lot of people believe that pansexuals, they are not faithful and they can't have, monogamous relationships. They're just sleeping with everybody. I would like to see an explanation of how pansexuals have relationships just like everybody else. They can be as monogamous or polygamous as anybody else. It's totally different." And so being able to write these things in that they wanted to see sort of respects who they are. And hopefully by showing even just this one person that I've talked to respect, it shows that I have respect for other people who have similar identifications.
Yeah.
And so that's the way that I approach all of my stories. I mean, I know nothing about being a sniper. I'm the closest I've come to the military is, saluting at the planes as they fly over on parade day. That's I know nothing about it. So talking to this person, okay, how do you feel? What would you do in this situation? Tell me about who you are. That's what really sinks my teeth into a person that I can translate into a character on the page.
I think that that's such an important distinction, that you're not attempting to draft a stereotype onto your work. You're attempting to put a character into your work who happens to be this or that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of authors try to approach it with sort of that broader perspective
Yeah.
of, I want to write someone who is pansexual, let's say, or homosexual, or whatever thing they want to write, or whether it's non-binary, transgender, or religious, or however they want to do it, a Democrat. These are all the sort of the hot button distinctions. So they think about the label instead of the person, and that label is an important part of who we are to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, who we are is what matters, and the label is just one aspect of that. So when I think about a character, I think about, who is this person? What do they want? What do they feel? And then how does this label that in my head I am giving them, how does it affect who they are? I mean, a perfect example is from my original series, the Hero of Darkness series, is this badass, 6 foot tall, pretty super strong assassin character, right? That's one label, right? And then my second series, The Queen of Thieves, was this early 20s, 5'3", not very strong thief character.
Hmm.
I have two fight scenes where in the assassin series, the assassin, he takes on 10 killers and defeats them all, with awesome action-packed badassery. In the thief series, it's her and 5 other people taking on one guy. So had I approached the character from, okay, I'm going to write this as a badass without taking into account her stature, she was short and small, it would have been super, super unreal. But because it's that label of short and small that I had to factor into, that's what makes her a genuine character that readers were like, holy shit, this fight scene against one guy was so much cooler to a certain degree than the assassin taking on 10 characters.
Yeah. How do you what's the good way of asking this question? What kind of social commentaries do you find yourself gravitating toward? Any themes that continually pop up in your work?
I think a little bit sort of the found family,
Hmm.
the family you make, you put together a team of people or a group of people, and they sort of, through shared hardships and challenges and obstacles, they become a family. That's probably the closest that I've come to a recurring theme that I've written in. The thing is that the truth is that every single one of my books deals with something different. So the assassin character, he's an outcast trying to find his place in the world where he doesn't belong. The thief series, she's all about trying to survive in a world of cruelty and crime. The young adult epic fantasy series is much more about, coming together, setting aside differences to solve a common goal. The military series is about, working together as a special forces team to, like, the sum of the individual, or what is that? The total is greater than the sum of the individual parts, or something like that. Like, it's 7 soldiers, but instead of it being, 7 individual soldiers, it's a force magnifier or force multiplier of 10 or 15 because they're working together.
Yeah.
So each series kind of has its own themes that come up. And I like that because it gives me a new way to explore a different part of humanity through each series. And in fact, that's what draws me to specific character types, is because it's something new that I haven't explored before.
When you're writing, obviously we're living in tumultuous times. Are you grabbing anything from outside and putting it into your book and saying, let's explore this a little bit in this story that I'm writing now? Or kind of like what you were saying before, are you writing something and being like, hey, this is kind of a mirror of what's happening outside. Maybe I can tap into this a little bit.
It's probably a bit of both. I don't know if my stories are super influenced by current events, because I mean, it's fantasy, which is medieval, and sci-fi, which is futuristic. That's probably a little bit closer to what's going on now. But so, for example, with this military one, I definitely looked at the sort of the repercussions of the VA system not treating the veterans properly, not dealing with their conditions, or they're approaching or the mishandling of emotional and psychological and mental health problems. And again, it's not the story that I'm trying to focus on so much. There's just some other aspects of it that fit naturally into the story, so I brought it in. But it's not, I don't think I look around at what's happening and say, yeah, I want to touch on that topic.
Very interesting. So, inevitably, as an artist, people are going to make assumptions about who you are through your work without knowing who you are.
Absolutely.
So, do you think that what you are portraying in your fiction, when it comes specifically to social commentary, talking about the human condition, do you think that it is a good reflection of who you are as Andy?
I want to say yes. So one thing that not many people, well, people who don't know me, people who do know me, I'm pretty open about it. But for people who don't know me, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome about 4 or 5 years ago, on the autism spectrum. And so when I got that diagnosis, I realized that there was so much that I didn't understand. So my drive through creating stories has been to understand people. And I want to think that that's what's reflected through these stories that I tell, is this this desire to understand people better. And so walking myself, like if you read my style of writing, the characters, they sort of walk through these mental journeys, like these thought processes or emotional processes, to come to some conclusion in every single pivotal scene,
Mm.
whatever it is. And so that's my way of coming to understand this decision that I want my character to make, or that the character needs to make. And by doing that, I show other people the same thing. And so I think I would hope that that side, the thoughtful side of things, is what people see when they read my stories.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you very much. Secondly, if I may dig into that a little more,
For sure.
do you think that that your diagnosis allows you to attack social issues in a way that maybe people who aren't diagnosed with Asperger's can't reach? Like I've heard that those diagnosed with Asperger's have a tendency to be more emotionally distant with things, and
Yep.
it requires a little bit more education, I guess, on their part in order to figure out kind of social mores and things like that. Do you think that
Absolutely.
it gives you an advantage then when you're writing about social issues, because you're having to go and do the deep research and figure out how people are thinking and how it affects them and so on?
Absolutely. I mean, so much of what I approach in my writing, I'm just a blank slate,
Yeah.
because I don't know, or I don't understand. And I think the more that I sort of become who I am, the more I lean into that understanding of, okay, I just don't know, so I'm going to find out. And so I approach these things with that sort of pragmatic, open-minded a mindset, where it's like, okay, tell me everything. I want as much information as you can give me about whatever it is that I'm researching. And then once I have all this information, then I'll digest it, and I'll, try to make sense of it in my way. And I think that is, in a huge sense, what makes it possible for me to tackle these things that I have no idea about, because I can approach it with, just feed me everything, just give me everything that you can, and I will process it, as opposed to someone who has experienced these things, or who maybe empathizes a little bit more.
I love it. So I would like to talk meta level branding here for a second.
All right.
Um, Branding is very, very difficult for anyone,
Yeah.
for any artist. But we all have feelings. There are some artists on Twitter, for example. I know that I personally am one who will share their political opinions openly and freely, as well as their social opinions and socioeconomic opinions and things like that.
Mhm.
How do you tackle it?
So I don't really have that many of those, societal opinions in that sense, because I don't know all of that much, and it's not something that interests me. So the things that interest me are sort of the things that I share. So I tend to dive more into the psychological aspects of things, because that's what hooks me into my stories and my characters. So when I'm researching something that's interesting, for an example, for the assassin character, I did a bunch of research into assassins, and I shared the results of that. Sort of a summarization of a paper that the Secret Service put together on 70 or so assassins in the last few decades.
Hmm.
And so I shared that, and that's the kind of thing that I share. Or I try to share things that are positive, or that uplift people. I'm not very outspoken in that sense. So I mean, that's mainly because I just don't have very strong opinions formed about a lot of things that people have very strong opinions formed about.
That's totally fair. Um, do you believe? Actually, let me ask you this question before I get to the other one. Um, in writing things that are foreign to you or alien, for example, a military sniper or an LGBTQ character,
Mhm.
in the process of research, have you learned anything that has maybe changed your viewpoint on the world, or transformed how you write?
I wouldn't say if it like drastically shifted anything for me, like a total 180-degree change, but
Yeah.
it's sort of opened my eyes to different aspects of society that I would never have been able to understand before, and so my opinion has shifted, gradually, sort of over the course of time, to be more inclusive, to be more understanding. I would say that's just as a direct result of doing all of this research, because the more I come to understand all of these different people, the more I can sort of build a Venn diagram that everybody in humanity fits into.
Mm.
Like, because I've done a bunch of research into snipers, I can understand pretty much any military type just a little bit better than I did before of that. Because I did a bunch of research into these different types of sexuality, I can understand all the sexuality types just a little bit better. I definitely don't have a complete understanding, nor will I ever claim to. But by the more information I get, the bigger the picture fills out for me. So I can come to see different sides of things, not only, sort of in a intellectual way, like, oh yes, this argument has merit, but actually like in with the people that I meet.
Awesome. So would you say that doing this kind of research has made you maybe a better person overall?
Oh, 1,000%. I mean, before I started writing, I was who I was, and then this diagnosis sort of led me down this path to understanding psychology and the human psyche and emotions and mental health and all of that. And so over the last, it's going to be almost 5.5 years now of researching that, it's just sort of helped me to have a greater understanding of myself, my wife, my kids, the people around me. And so I'm a lot more forgiving, a lot more empathetic. Or let's say I try to be more empathetic. It comes harder, obviously, but I have this sort of, I'm more well-rounded as a human being because of this information that I've absorbed and sort of written into the characters, which really in some way means bringing it to life. Maybe I don't say or do the things that my characters do, but they feel genuine to me because they are exactly, they're my creations. And so in a way, I am those genuine emotions as well.
Yeah. That actually leads really well to the next question that I had for you. Um, we've been talking a lot about otherisms, things that you are not, but there are a lot of things that you, Andy, are.
Absolutely.
You're a man, you're a husband, you're a father, you're a person with Asperger's. I- Do you ever feel a drive to talk about those things specifically, the things that you know and are familiar with, and put them into your fiction because you have something you want to say about them?
When I have something that I want to say about them, absolutely. So another thing most people don't know about me is I was raised in a cult, and
Whoa!
there will come a day that I write a story, whether fantasy or sci-fi. It's going to be one of the two, where I write a story about a character raised the way I was raised. It's going to be, exaggerated. It's going to be, turned into fiction, obviously, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of it is, stranger than fiction. So there will come a day, but I have to have the right story to tell. And I've had this idea in my head, sort of the idea is you can take the person out of a cult, but you can't take the cult out of a person.
Oh, interesting.
That's sort of the story that I want to tell. But this is something I came up with 4 or 5 years ago, but I haven't yet found the right vehicle, the right character, the right story, all of that to tell it. And so until I do, it's going to sit there in the back burner, and who knows, maybe I'll never tell it. But there are other things that I have wanted to do. So when I first got the Asperger's diagnosis on autism, I did a lot of research into autism, and it led to some really interesting things, like sensory processing disorder, which is often paired with autism. And so I put that into a story. I wrote the story of a young boy who couldn't speak, and his only way of communicating was through paintings, which only he could see because of his sensory processing disorder. And so it's this it's sort of this look into the mind of someone who is locked inside their own brain, which is how I have felt more often than not, because of sort of the limitations or deficiencies that result from this Asperger syndrome. So when it fits into the story I want to tell, I will absolutely write it in. But otherwise, I will save it, because I don't want to be that author, who puts himself onto every single character, onto every single page to sort of
Mm,
moralize or lecture. That's not who I am.
yeah, that's cool. It's good that you know that. um, do you feel that there is a distinct difference between the stuff that you're really passionate about, i.e., the cult thing, and I don't mean to minimize it. I apologize for just
No, no, no.
calling it the
That's
cult
totally
thing.
fine.
But that versus something else that might be super heavy for someone. For example, pansexual representation.
So for me, the thing that I'm most passionate about is the thing that interests me in the character that I'm writing.
Mm,
So right now, the thing that's sort of been the most dominant in the book that I'm working on right now is the character. He basically ghosted his special forces teams after he got meted out. He didn't want them to see him in a wheelchair. So sort of exploring the mindset that would make someone go from, these guys are my brothers, I'm going to be here till I die, till I'm never going to see them again because I don't want to be, I don't want to look them in the face and be ashamed at the pity that I see. So it's like, it's whatever the story calls for is sort of the thing that holds my attention the most. But then the character arc overall of drug addiction and finding a way to survive and cope with addiction, because it's a recurring theme in the story, is something that has been much more intriguing for me in the past 6 months since I've been working on the series, as opposed to before, when drug addiction just didn't fit into the story I was telling.
Yeah. Any issues that you've explored and written that you've gone back to hit again?
I mean, PTSD comes up in just about every single thing that I write to some various extent, just because PTSD isn't limited only to soldiers. You've got people who witness a car crash and they have PTSD from it. People who are in a car crash and who have PTSD. People who, lose their parents, and it brings this, it instills it into their brain. And so there's so many different things that can be explored. There really is no end, because everybody's experience is totally unique. The methods of dealing with loss is another one that keeps coming up, because my characters end up getting killed. Not the main characters until the end of the series, let's say. But I did a count this morning, and there is exactly one book in my 25 currently published that do not have a character death. And it's just something that I've written in because it's great for emotional stakes, but it's something that I was able to, that I kind of came to realize that I explored because of my own losses. I've lost 2 brothers over the course of my life. And that's not something that I want to, peddle to gain sympathy, or to say, like he's suffering through his stories. But it's something that, because I have experienced this, because I've watched my brothers and my sisters and my parents and their friends and all of that go through this, it's something like, well, this is something that I want to explore, how one person copes with loss, how another person does, or things like that. It's just kind of whatever feels organic to the characters that I'm writing, or the stories that I'm telling, the world that I'm trying to inhabit.
Yeah, I dig it. Last one here before we close it out. Stan Lee, who is one of my idols, has famously talked about feeling ashamed at being just, quote, just a comic book artist. And that while all of his friends were doctors and lawyers and, things like that, that he felt kind of inadequate that he was a comic book artist, until he realized that entertaining people is just as important as anything else. Do you resonate with that?
Oh, absolutely. I will never change the world through my writing. I will never, even bringing it to authors, right? There are people like J.R.R. Tolkien or J.K. Rowling or Stephen King. These are people who change the landscape of fiction. I will never be that, so much less changing any kind of world. But if I can sort of change one person's mind, or influence their decision, or brighten their day, or help them feel represented or seen, or if I can change one person's life, that's enough for me as a writer. I will feel that, that I've done what I needed to do through the stories that I'm trying to tell. And so I don't aspire to greatness in that sense. I aspire to greatness in the sense of being as genuinely human and telling the most genuinely human stories I can. And that for me is the definition of greatness in terms of my writing.
I love it. I don't think I could have, as you say, any better.
There's a little sound bite to put on the news heading.
I love it. Before we get out of here, Andy, and I get you onto your shameless promoting, is there anything that you would like to leave people with today?
I would say that the one thing that I try to do in my stories is leave a sense of hopefulness. And especially at a time like right now, when everything looks pretty shitty for most of us, being able to walk away and say, you know what, no matter how dark the world is, it's going to get better somehow in some small way. That's the thing that I try to write into every single story. So hopefully that's something that people take away, and that no matter how dark things are, it is going to get better.
I love it. Let's move on to the shameless self-promotion here. Where can people find you and what you're getting into?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so actually a new series of mine just launched April 14th on Amazon. It is the Cerberus series, starting with Assassination Protocol, a recovering drug addict, paraplegic, former special ops sniper turned government hitman. It's a mouthful, but it's so much fun. And it's the first of what will eventually be a 12-book series. Probably around this time next year, all 12 will be out, because that's the kind of writer that I am.
Yeah, you move fast.
Yeah, I do. I love what I do, so it's it's so much fun to put in the time, and I type fast too. You can find my website is just andypeloquin.com. My name, Andy Peloquin. I'm on Facebook as Andy Peloquin. I have my Andy Peloquin's Literary Legionnaires group, which is my private Facebook group that people are more than welcome to join, hang out, talk fantasy, have fun, essentially, and science fiction now too. And I'm on the Fantasy Fiends podcast every week on Thursday nights. We do it live on YouTube, but we also have episodes on Podbean and iTunes and things like that. And again, this is a fantasy and sci-fi themed podcast, but instead of focusing on the, how do you write? What's your process? Are you a pantser versus a plotter? All of that. We dive into the themes that drive the stories. So, as an example, this week we are talking about chosen ones, but instead of, what makes someone a chosen one, it's what happens after they fulfill their mission. What happens to those chosen ones once everything is done? And it's another example, another way for us to dive into human nature and explore, the human experience through the course of the discussion, because every single book of every single author that we have on is different to some extent. And so being able to say, well, what do what sort of things do you write into your book? Let's talk about them. That for me is what intrigues me far more than, what their daily work schedule's like. And then of course we get to do a live reading of the scene, where I put on my best voices and my co-host does his worst voices. And it's just an hour of fun every week. So that's probably one of the best places to come and hang out with me.
Awesome. Andy Peloquin, you've been a real treat. Thank you so much for doing this and being part of WriteHive. I think that not only this conversation, but also your heroic villains and villainous heroes conversation is going to inspire a lot of people.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
I
hope I didn't talk too much.
You talked the exact perfect amount.
Good.
Thank you, Andy, and we'll see you again soon.
All right.